Okay, kia ora koutou. Welcome to today's webinar with Volunteering New Zealand. I'm Scott Miller, Chief Executive of Volunteering New Zealand, and we're really pleased to have Scott Ussher from Statistics New Zealand sharing the office with us today. So being in Wellington rather than Australia, which has been the case for our last two presenters, we're able to have a bit more of a conversational opportunity, which we're really pleased about. So we've got Scott Ussher here, and Scott's going to introduce himself. And then we're going to take the format with today's presentation that he's got some slides. Like the previous webinar that we did in particular, we really welcome your engagement, whether that's via question and answer through the text box, or that's through the through hand signalling, where you can pop your hand up and we'll allow you the opportunity to speak. So without further ado, because these are fast, short, sharp 30-minute webinars, I'd like to introduce you to Scott. Scott is the manager at Statistics New Zealand. Scott, do you want to tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Kia ora tātou. Thanks, Scott, for the introduction and the invite to come along and speak today. So yeah, my name's Scott Ussher. I'm a manager of a social statistics area at Stats New Zealand, where I've been for the last 7 years. Really my interests and passions lie in providing insights into areas of people's lives through data. I was kind of reflecting as I was putting this presentation together in the last couple of days as well. I guess another part of me is actually I'm a sometimes volunteer, and probably more importantly, I'm a huge benefactor of other people volunteering. In particular, I have 3 young daughters whose activities range from school trips to swimming clubs, which when time allows, I like to help out with, but it's fair to say most of the time it's other people doing the helping out. So just a little something I was reflecting on, that actually probably I don't take the time to kind of think about how much benefit I'm getting out of people volunteering in my life.
And that's an interesting thing, isn't it? You know, we often take for granted the volunteering that we do in our communities, and it could be a nice segue into the fact that, first of all, it's National Volunteer Week. So if you haven't thanked a volunteer, we strongly encourage you to recognise the great work that people are doing in your organisation or in your community. But also, you know, you're the second person this week, Scott, that said that it's only when they reflected on the fact that they did do volunteering and it was something that they did outside of their home environment that made them a volunteer. Normally we just kind of fob it off as just, you know, stuff that we do, you know, without kind of putting a construct of volunteering. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's so true. It's taken me, you know, having a look at the statistics and thinking, well, you know, I am one of those people, and you know, and actually thinking more importantly, I guess, about actually the benefits that I'm getting out of other people volunteering, and perhaps that actual, maybe I'll think about thanking a few of those people later on this week for the work they do, especially around with my children and stuff. Yeah,
terrific. So look, Scott, let's get started on your presentation here. Now remember, folks, that we do encourage you to contribute either by question or by text. So please, you know, if something's jumping out at you and you want to know more, Scott is here, and this is an interactive webinar that is hopefully of benefit to you. Appreciate that your time is busy, and really, you know, this is an opportunity to understand what statistics are available, what is Stats New Zealand doing in this space, and how does this turn into powerful information for your organisation. How can you tell a better story through volunteering statistics that Stats NZ is collecting? So Scott, over to you.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so you know, you obviously see in the slides, and we've talked about, I'm from Stats New Zealand, Tataranga Aotearoa. We are New Zealand's official data agency. We're a government agency, but we act independently of the government. Our main role is to collect information on people and businesses, and then turn that information and data, or turn that information into data and insights about New Zealand. Our vision is to unleash the power of data to change lives, and part of the information we're trying to unleash is around volunteering work. We do have quite a tradition at Stats New Zealand of collecting volunteering work, but it's probably fair to say that over the last few years, I think given a growing recognition of the importance of volunteering work, both for the economic benefits to New Zealand and the social benefits to myself and others, that we have taken more kind of holistic, focused approach on what we want to do in terms of collecting statistics and taking it beyond the just how many people are volunteering and how many hours they're doing to collecting a bit more wider information about that. So I thought I would start with a bit of information about actually where we do get our information from on volunteer work. The first one, and when I talk about what we've traditionally done, the census of population dwellings, which I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with, given we've just been through the 2018 census a couple of months ago. So the census is all about basically our counts of people in New Zealand and households. And within that census, we run a number of other questions to get some information, including one of which, or a number of which, are about unpaid work. So there's the 3 or 4 questions about the type of unpaid work people have done over the last year. And it's probably a good time to point out that throughout most of our collection of information across these sources, we kind of look at unpaid work from, I guess, 3 different perspectives. And possibly one of those perspectives is what we might think about in this perspective of volunteer work. There is the unpaid work, which is really crucial, the stuff that's done around your own house, you know, the cleaning, the looking after children and all that sort of thing. That's one part of it. There's also the information about unpaid work that is done for other households, which I know sometimes kind of fits into a little bit of the volunteering scheme, but so that's the second part of it. And then the third part of the questions we ask are around the actual volunteer work for organisations or groups. And I guess a lot of the information I'm going to talk to later on in this presentation are around that third category of volunteering for organisations and groups.
Which is otherwise referred to as formal volunteering, really, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so informal volunteering is the work done in your community, but outside of an organisation. And in the international environment of volunteering, Scott, there's some consideration of whether informal volunteering is the right use of words. And so there's a bit of a conversation going on at the moment that says, what is informal volunteering? It doesn't have a very meaningful connection to the work that we do in our communities that isn't for an organisation, but it's what we have at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good point. And I actually don't know the exact wordings we use around those 3 different things, but I'm not sure we actually use the informal thing to talk about the unpaid work in other households, but rather more about direct unpaid work and things like that.
Sure.
Yeah. So anyway, the census of population and dwellings is a really important source of information for us on volunteer work, because what it is a really comprehensive, we talk to virtually everyone in New Zealand, so we kind of have this information on everyone in New Zealand and what they're doing. There are some limitations, though, of course, to the census information, and that is the infrequency. Every 5 years, we're only getting that information every 5 years, and also the narrow focus that it has, which is basically on numbers of people who are doing volunteer work. That's really all we can kind of get out of that. The second source of information that we have at Stats New Zealand is our time use survey. And the time use survey is a pretty comprehensive survey where we actually go out to a sample of people in New Zealand and get them to tell us in quite detail over a 2-day period, actually fill out a diary of what they're doing, how long they did it, who they're doing it with, and all that sort of thing. So there's actually some really rich information about exactly what people are doing within the time use survey.
Scott, I've just stopped you there. I wonder, I know a question that came up another time is that 2 days isn't very much though if you're volunteering once a week or once a month. Have you got any thoughts on that?
So the time use survey doesn't actually just only rely on a diary for information. It actually also has a questionnaire part attached to it. And so there is actually wider questions about people doing unpaid work within that questionnaire, not just on those 2 days of work. So we can use that wider stuff, context stuff around last 4 weeks and that sort of thing, and kind of link it back to the actual really detailed stuff on the diary. We do try and we make sure that the diary actually has a good representative sample across days and people and that sort of thing. So while an individual might be filling it out for just 2 days of their life, really, that sample that are filling it in are spread across, Monday to Sunday, different times of the year and that sort of thing.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because I understand as well that it's about 7,000 or 8,000 people that do that, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that is effectively statistically significant to extrapolate to the New Zealand environment. So it's really robust. Just a shame that it's only every 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, that's the exact thing. So any survey we do, it's all about estimating what's going on in the population. So that's the key point, is that actually while we're only sampling, in cases 5,000, maybe 10,000 people, everything we do is to make estimations of what's going on in the population, and we'll put error bounds around those estimations, but we put them out as this is what's going on in New Zealand. So you bring up a good point. The real limitation with the time use is it's only every 10 years. We did our first one in 1998, 99. The second one followed up in 2010, 2011. I think I've got those dates pretty close. So it's been 10 years between them, and the plan is, at the moment, we're underway doing a bit of planning around the next one being in 2020. So another 10-year gap. It will likely stay as a 10-year gap around the time use survey, and we'll look to fill in gaps with some of these other sources. So the next survey I've got on there is the General Social Survey. Our General Social Survey is our survey of well-being. Basically, we ask a lot of questions around how well people are doing in life, their social connectedness, how much trust they have in people and things like that. So it gives us a really good idea of people's social outcomes, and the real advantage of being able to do unpaid work and volunteer work within the General Social Survey is we're then able to look at how does that work and volunteer actually match up with some of the social outcomes that are flowing on from that. So we've recently been able to, from our 2016 data, put out some really interesting insights on actually what those outcomes are flowing on from volunteer work.
And Scott, would that be, for example, the volunteering and donations by New Zealanders in 2016? Is that?
That's the exact report.
Yeah, and we're just sharing the PowerPoint at the moment, but I'll flash this up for you, and we'll send you out the link to some of these things that we talk about afterwards, because they're really valuable. But in the interest of time, let's carry on.
Yeah. So I'll kind of quickly skim over the Te Kupinga one, actually, because that's basically a very similar survey to the General Social Survey. It's just completely focused on Māori, and it takes a Māori worldview to well-being, which allows you to kind of look at some slightly different things in terms of Māori. And it, again, provides some really interesting insights around that. Second to last one on there we've got is the Household Labour Force Survey. So we have so far done nothing on voluntary work in the Household Labour Force Survey, but we are currently in the field collecting information from our Household Labour Force Survey on volunteering work. That's going to be, hopefully we'll be able to start to release some information on that later on in this year. But that is going to allow us to do some slightly different things that will allow us to kind of match up our people are volunteering versus their paid work. It'll allow us to do a lot more work around the industry and the occupations that people are doing within their unpaid work or their volunteer work. So we're going to be able to start to do some really interesting insights out of that survey once it comes out. And then I'll just quickly touch on the non-profit satellite account work, which is actually really a report that puts together a lot of this information to give an overall picture of volunteer work in New Zealand. Basically draws on all the sources I've talked about, as well as a bit of information and economic information, and talks about volunteer work in general. So that's the sources that we use to get some information. And so I just want to touch also a little briefly, I guess, I don't get in too much detail, but just touch briefly on some of the actual key statistics that we're finding out of this stuff. So Census 2013, I know it's getting a little bit out of date, but we should have some more up-to-date information early next year. In 2013, 1.25 million New Zealanders had volunteered over the last year. So that's around 1/3 of New Zealanders who had volunteered. While I say it's a little bit out of date, the information in the GSS from 2016 kind of backs up this number. The numbers are slightly different, but that's more about collection methods rather than numbers having changed or anything like that. A bit of information around that, and so that 1.25 million in 2013 is an increase on what we found back in 2006. The numbers of people who are volunteering is actually going up. The other side to the actual volunteering work is the hours of time that have been spent on it. So Census time use survey, we've calculated that annually those 1.25 million New Zealanders are spending 157 million hours of time on volunteer work. So on average, that's 3 hours per week that people who are volunteering are actually spending doing it. Just a little bit of, which is an interesting thing that I know you've done a little bit looking at this stuff, Scott, but while the numbers of people who are volunteering has gone up, in actual fact, the hours have gone down. So people are actually spending less time volunteering than they did in 2004, 2006, but more people are volunteering. And one of the other interesting insights from the GSS work that we've recently done, I think that distribution of who's spending time volunteering is not even. It's not a normal distribution as we might talk about in statistics. It actually, 14% of those people volunteering are doing half of the volunteering. So,
which is amazing.
Yeah.
From a volunteer management perspective, it really defines the argument of how we manage individual volunteers relative to their level of effort that they're contributing, either through time or engagement, is really individualized. We can't just treat them as a homogenous, we were all doing 3 hours per week. You know, there's some incredibly generous people, and you know, contrary to stereotype, they're probably not even older folks that are in the retired age, which is the general stereotype. I imagine that some of them are younger, or there's some of them have come from different demographics to what we would anticipate to be a typical volunteer. I use the words.
Yeah, that's right. And that flows on to my next slide, actually, Scott. So I'll just touch on the one last point there, though, that, you know, from our non-profit satellite account work, you know, we've calculated that volunteer work is contributing approximately 3.5 billion to the economy. So huge, you know, that's a huge amount.
And does that 3.5 billion, just taking into account Jane's question, how do you get to 3.5 billion of GDP labor, of volunteer labor? Like, how is that measured and counted? Because that can be quite a tricky one. Like, we hear this quite regularly. How do you count a volunteer hour? Do you do a minimum wage, or is it a wage replacement of having a paid person? Other people have been using a living wage. I know it's quite a tricky question, but any thoughts you could offer?
It is a tricky question for me because I'm not actually involved in the non-profit institution satellite account, but I'm pretty sure I read something in my preparation that said we actually use the minimum wage to calculate it. So you're quite right. Well, I don't know if this is what you're saying, but I think it's fair to say that it is probably an underestimation of actually what is actually the true value is.
Quite very interesting.
I think one of the interesting things is the adding of the questions to the HLFS will allow us to be a little bit more complex in maybe how we calculate some of that stuff. Actually having more information around occupation and industry that people are actually working in will allow us to kind of do some occupation and industry wage things to say, actually, what does this more look like?
Yeah, and that's certainly a case that we need to kind of carry on the conversation with stats to inform them that there is a variety of different values that need to be integrated, especially when we're thinking about the scientific work that is incredibly scarce in a paid capacity, but you'll see volunteers contributing generously, and then putting a minimum wage can really understate the work of some environmental, for example, volunteering. But anyway, let's carry on.
Yeah, and I guess I'd just finish by saying, that's part of the reason really that we've put that into the HLFS is so we can start to actually look at that a bit more in a bit more detail. Yeah. And so, as I said, just flowing on to that, I've just put a general slide up in here, but obviously the distribution of who is volunteering is, is not just, is quite widespread, I guess. There are some key groups, and your point is right, it's not just elderly retired people who are volunteering, but actually, in general, older people are more likely to volunteer.
Right.
There are, the GSS statistics we just put out that show that older people are more likely. And I might not get to a slide at the end, but we do know, and GSS has helped to emphasise this, that one of the key barriers to volunteering is time. And actually, the age thing and the labour force status thing is highly associated with actually whether you volunteer or not, because I guess it gives you the ability to have some time to actually do that. I know myself, time and family, work and family commitments are a huge reason why I don't do as much volunteering as I should or probably would like to.
And that's a responsibility for volunteer managers and leaders around the country to figure out how do we offer volunteer roles that accommodate busyness, and how do we accommodate families to be involved as a group. Sometimes it's very difficult to identify opportunities for families to learn the value of volunteering, to build that family unit, or to work in an organisation. But the time thing is the biggest. It's the biggest in the US, Canada, Ireland, anywhere you go in the world, people are claiming time. And so with a 42% reduction in number of hours that people are volunteering, we really need that level of cognizance that this is an issue that isn't going away. And if we're going to retain a volunteer workforce, it's going to require some serious adjustment to the types of roles that we offer and how we manage them.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. I don't know how much time we've got left, but one of the things back on the previous slide is you did touch on socioeconomic status as well, and that is another big, I won't say driver, but thing associated with whether people volunteer or not. People who earn a high over 70,000, say high income, but earn over 70,000 were a lot more likely to volunteer than those who earn less, which is kind of an interesting thing when you match it back to the time and the labour force status stuff. But and also people with, around the socioeconomic stuff, people with a higher qualification or living in an owner-occupied dwelling, which are all measures around socioeconomic status, are all more likely to volunteer.
Right.
So I don't necessarily have the explanation for that. I'll leave that to you, but there's something going on there, I guess.
Sure. And I think for some people, being able to access reimbursements is an opportunity. How do we break down the barriers when you're on a fixed income? Is by offering free transport to the volunteer role. Sometimes parking is a forgotten issue. You know, if you're going to volunteer in the CBD of Wellington for 2 hours, you're looking at $8, $9, $10.
Yeah.
So it can add up, and if you do that once or twice a week, it can quickly scale. We don't often seek that as a volunteer organisations to recover those costs, either through funding applications or other means, for the fact that poorer volunteers are suffering in an inequitable situation sometimes. But anyway.
Yeah. Yep. And this might be my last slide, but just to touch briefly on what we've already talked about. The GSS in 2016 asked questions about barriers to volunteering. So this is within a survey. I have no doubt there's actually a little bit of social biasness connected with this stuff. The had no interest, 9%. Who knows, if you didn't have a person sitting in front of you asking this question, whether that might be a bit higher. Time and cost are quite often the easy things to pin this down to, but yeah. So obviously the highest thing there is 45% of people who don't volunteer are saying they're not volunteering because they didn't have the time, and that's kind of been broken down a little bit further to say the key things around that are family commitments and, most importantly, work commitments.
Yeah.
And so also what GSS has done a little bit as well is it's been able to let us kind of look at the associations between volunteering and some of the social outcomes that we look at within GSS, and these are some of the things that come through. To be honest, all the social outcomes I think we looked at, they actually being involved in volunteering mean that, or are associated with better social outcomes, whether it be an increased life satisfaction, whether it be rating your health as better. I know we talk about quite often the benefits around volunteering of the social connectedness that it gives people, so there's less feelings of loneliness. And another one we look at that actually, there's association with greater levels of trust in other people.
So they're all really great examples. We're just back on screen, are we? That when we're trying to engage a volunteer workforce and trying to install on them, why volunteer? Why give up your valuable time? I think you've just articulated some really great reasons for the people that are listening for why they should sell the idea of volunteering in their time. So look, we've had Jane's given us a question there. Look, if you've got your own questions, please use the webinar chat. We'd love to hear your thoughts and ask any questions in the remaining couple of minutes that you might have for Scott. Jane, I'm going to promote you to panelist in the hope that you'll be able to use your microphone. We'll give this a go, see if it works. Jane, are you there? You'll have to unmute yourself there, or we can do that. Jane, are you there? No, Jane, if you're there, we'll have to get you to write your question in the meantime. But please, if you've got any questions, Scott, what else is in the radar for volunteering in the world of stats in the meantime? What can we do as an audience that can help Stats New Zealand? What is some data that you anticipate to see from the census or from the household labour force that may be of other interest to the team here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the big thing for us in the coming months. Like I say, late this year, early next year, we would hope to have more information out on from the census and from the HLFS. I guess it's a case of let's wait maybe and see what sort of data comes out of that and what new insights it brings, and then maybe we can start the conversation again about actually what that information is telling us and how we might be able to use it to take things forward.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Rachel's just asked a good question. Do you have some good summary information you can recommend to us?
Yeah, I think, well, Scott's got it there. He's probably more switched on to me on this one actually, but there's can I hold this up?
Yes,
there's
please.
A good non-profit institution satellite account information that's got pretty much a lot of the stuff that I talked about today and an infographic, which I don't know, a lot of people find quite handy. So it is on our website somewhere. We can
we'll send out a link.
Sort out a link to that.
Great.
And so everyone can see.
Good.
It.
We'll try Mina here, who's asked to by raising her hand here. We'll just unmute you, Mina. Unmute, not working. Maybe, Mina, have you got some functionality with yours there? You might need to use the chat function as well. Sorry, Mina. But look, we've got something from Natasha Muir. Does it have regional breakdowns?
So the slide I put up is it's one thing I didn't talk about in terms of strengths and limitations of data sources. Census is able to do regional breakdowns as much as you want. We do start to struggle with regional breakdowns once we start to use the survey sources. So in terms of what I showed up, number of people or proportion of people in a region volunteering, Census does that really well. Any of the more detail necessarily about breakdowns, distributions, ages, sex, that sort of thing, even occupation type things, when we use our surveys to do that, go much below the kind of, a big level Auckland, Wellington, Canterbury is really difficult for us to do. And that is why it is one of the reasons we use multiple sources.
Great. Chris Atkinson asks if there's any scope within our work to capture data about corporate volunteering. There seems to be more for-profits getting involved in this, so it'd be captured trends and benefits. Any ideas there, Scott?
That's a good idea. That's a good question. I actually don't have the answer to that. While I actually think that might fit within the kind of ILO framework of unpaid work, I'm pretty sure we have kind of avoided it within our surveys.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of that. Yeah. But yeah, I wouldn't want to say for certainty on that. Sorry, not much of an answer.
Yeah, no, it's quite hard, isn't it? I mean, we feel that it's untapped in regards to what people are, quoting as hours worked and things like that. So it is a bit of an unknown. Mina's asked via text here, this is about the immigration policy for volunteers. I'll try to join the audio. We'll try you one more time here, Mina, and this will be the last question. And we try and unmute the, oops, right, sorry. Okay, Mina, you there? Oops.
Hello.
Hello, Mina.
Hi. Yes. Good afternoon. I'm the volunteer coordinator in one of the aged care facility. It's just because I have a concern with the visitor's visa and student visa, and it said in the immigration policy that the volunteers are not allowed to receive anything as this is a volunteer work. But sometimes I feel bad when the volunteers here, they come here for the whole day, trying to help others, and then we couldn't even offer them a food or even sometimes like a little money for their transport like that, especially if they are students. What do you think about this policy?
Yeah. Yeah, Mina, so this is a conversation on statistics today. Your query in regards to immigration is very topical. Volunteering New Zealand is dealing with Immigration New Zealand on two other points very related. And if you could please email us at office@volunteering NZ, we'll happily hear hear your circumstance at your organisation, because it is an issue that we're currently involved in. So we'll have to mute you there, and we're going to wind up, but that's a topic for another conversation, but do please email us. So look, given that we said that this would be a half-hour webinar, we appreciate your generosity of time. We do like to keep these nice and short and sharp. Scott, thank you very much for coming to our office this afternoon, sharing with us. If you do have other questions about statistics, please get in touch with us, either through the webinar functionality or office@volunteeringnz.org.nz. And we will send out the NPISA. We will send out the link to the 2016 data, the volunteering and donations by New Zealanders, which gives you some really current data that's very recent. And from me, thank you very much. This is my last webinar that you'll hear with me. I move to volunteering Victoria next month, so I wish you all the best with your volunteering endeavours in New Zealand, and I say ka kite anō, and kia ora, and good afternoon, and happy National Volunteer Week. Cheers.
Ka kite.